I went back home because I had forgotten my reading glasses on the dining room table. At 70 years old, these lapses in memory have become more frequent than I care to admit. I carefully opened the front door, trying not to make a sound, and that's when I heard my son, Malcolm, talking on the phone in the living room. His tone was off. There was something about that laugh that chilled me to the bone. I froze in the hallway when I heard him say with a laugh full of malice, "I can just imagine her face when she sees the empty account. Honey, it's done. I transferred all the money to your account, just like we planned." I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. My own son, my only child, was talking about me as if I were a stranger, as if I were his victim. I leaned against the hall wall, trying to process what I had just heard. Malcolm continued speaking in a voice I had never heard from him before, cold and calculated. "Don't worry, Sasha. She never suspected a thing. She trusts me too much. She's always been that way, too naive for her own good." Every word was like a dagger straight to my heart. I recognized the name Sasha, his wife, the woman who had entered our lives barely 2 years ago with that perfect smile, and those sweet words that I now understood were completely false. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to stand, to keep listening, even though every word was tearing me apart inside. $280,000, my love, Malcolm continued, his triumphant tone churning my stomach. "It's everything she had in that main account. It's ours now. We can buy that beach house you wanted, the new car, everything. $280,000, the money my late husband Leroy and I had saved during 40 years of hard work, the money from the sale of the family drugstore we built from the ground up, the money that represented my security, my peace of mind, my future, and my own son had just stolen it as if it were the most natural thing in the world." I shut my eyes tight, trying to hold back the tears threatening to overflow. My mind flew back to the past, to those days when my life was completely different. 5 years ago, when Leroy passed away from a sudden heart attack, I thought I'd never recover from the pain. We had built a beautiful life together, full of love, labor, and sacrifice. The drugstore we opened when we were barely 25 became our pride, our legacy. We worked shoulder to shoulder for decades, serving our community, knowing every customer by name, being a part of their lives. Malcolm was our only son, the center of our universe. We raised him with love, but also with values, or so I believed. He was always a smart child, maybe a little spoiled, but I thought that was normal. When Leroy died, Malcolm was by my side at the funeral, holding me up when my legs couldn't take anymore. He helped me with all the paperwork and endless procedures that follow a death. It was he who suggested selling the drugstore. "Mama, you've worked enough. You deserve to rest, to enjoy life," he would tell me with that caring voice that I now knew was pure manipulation. We sold the drugstore 3 years ago for a considerable sum. I invested part of the money and kept another part in savings accounts. I made sure I had a solid financial cushion for my senior years. Malcolm knew every detail of my finances because I, naive as I was, trusted him blindly. He was my son, my blood. I never imagined he could betray me in such a calculated and cruel way. 2 years ago, he met Sasha at a business conference. She was younger than him, maybe 35, with that artificial beauty that comes from well-done surgeries and perfect makeup. From the first moment I saw her, something inside me warned me that there was something strange about her. But I silenced that little voice because I wanted to see my son happy. The wedding was modest but elegant. I paid for much of the expense because Malcolm insisted he was going through a rough patch financially with his consulting business. Sasha hugged me that day and called me Mama, with tears in her eyes that were clearly fake now. She said she had always dreamed of having a mother-in-law like me, loving and generous. How foolish I was to believe her, to let myself be swept up by those sweet words that hid such dark intentions. After the wedding, things began to change subtly. Malcolm started visiting me less frequently. When he came, he always brought Sasha, and she dominated every conversation. She constantly talked about money, investments, and property. She asked questions that seemed innocent at the time about my bank accounts, my savings, my plans for the future. I answered honestly because I never imagined I was being evaluated, studied, and prepared to be stripped of everything I owned. 6 months ago, Malcolm suggested something that I now see was the beginning of the final plan. "Mama, you should make me the power of attorney on your main account. That way, if anything happens to you, if you have an emergency, I can help you immediately without bureaucratic complications." It sounded reasonable, even logical. At my 70 years old, the idea of having someone trustworthy with access to my accounts in case of an emergency seemed sensible. I went to the bank with Malcolm, signed the papers, and gave him that power that he had now used to destroy me. Malcolm's voice pulled me out of my painful memories. "Yes, honey. In a few more hours, I'll go over to Mama's house to check on her. I'm sure she'll have gone to the bank by then and discovered the account is empty. I'll fake surprise. I'll tell her it must be a bank error, that we'll investigate it together. By the time she figures out the truth, it'll be too late." He laughed again. That laugh I'll never forget. That laugh that turned my son into a stranger before my eyes. I felt something break inside me in that moment. It wasn't just my heart shattering. It was the entire image I had built of my son over 70 years of life. The Malcolm I knew, the boy I cared for when he had a fever, the teenager I helped with his homework, the man I supported in every important decision, simply didn't exist. He had been replaced by this stranger who spoke of robbing me as if it were an accomplishment to be proud of. Tears finally rolled down my cheeks as I listened to him continue planning my supposed ruin with this woman who called herself my daughter-in-law. "The best part of it all," Malcolm continued in that tone that twisted my insides, "is that she'll never suspect it was intentional. She'll think someone else cleaned out her account, that it was a bank error, anything but that her own son robbed her. She's too trusting, too innocent. Always has been." Every word was like poison dripping onto an open wound. I wanted to scream. I wanted to enter that living room and confront him immediately, but something stronger than the pain stopped me. It was rage, yes, but it was also something more calculated, colder. If I went in now and faced them without concrete proof, without a plan, Malcolm could manipulate the situation. He could convince me that I had misinterpreted everything. He could use my age against me and make me doubt my own sanity. I retreated slowly toward the front door, each step measured and silent, like a thief in my own house. I left with the same care with which I had entered, closing the door without making the slightest noise. Once outside, I had to hold on to the railing of the entrance because my legs were shaking so badly I thought I would collapse right there. The afternoon sun hit my face, and for a moment the world seemed too bright, too normal for the tragedy I had just uncovered. Neighbors walked their dogs, children played in the street. Life continued its course as if nothing had changed, as if my world hadn't completely fallen apart in a matter of minutes. I walked to my car with automatic steps, not really thinking about where I was going. I sat in the driver's seat and allowed myself to cry for the first time in 5 years since Leroy's death. I cried for the betrayal, for the naivete, for the years of unconditional love I had given to a son who turned out to be capable of stabbing me in the back without the slightest remorse. I cried for Leroy, wishing with all my soul that he were here with me, although at the same time I was grateful that he didn't have to witness this devastating betrayal from his only son. The pain was so intense that I felt like I was drowning, that I would never be able to breathe normally again. But then, in the midst of that sea of tears and despair, something began to change inside me. It was as if a spark had been ignited in the deepest part of my being. It wasn't just rage I felt, it was determination. It was the absolute certainty that I wouldn't stand by, that I wouldn't let myself be destroyed by this betrayal. I had survived the death of my husband. I had built a business from scratch. I had faced decades of challenges and obstacles. I wasn't going to allow my own son to turn me into his victim without a fight. I wiped my tears away in anger and started the car's engine. I had to think. I had to plan. I had to be smarter than them. As I drove aimlessly through the city streets, my mind began to work at full speed. I started going over the last few months with new clarity, seeing signs I had completely ignored. I remembered how Sasha always found excuses to ask me about my finances. "Oh, Mama Alara, I'm so jealous of your financial stability. How did you manage to save so much? Which bank do you use? Do you have investments?" I, the fool, responded with detailed explanations, proud to share the financial wisdom that Leroy and I had accumulated over the years. I never imagined that every answer was another piece of the puzzle they were assembling to strip me of everything. I also remembered how Malcolm had insisted so much on me making him the power of attorney on my main account. The first time he suggested it, I had hesitated. Something inside me said it wasn't necessary, that I was still perfectly capable of managing my own finances. But he insisted for weeks. "Mama, it's just a precaution. What if you get sick? What if you have an accident? You need someone who can access your accounts in an emergency." Sasha also joined the pressure. "Oh, Mama, Malcolm just wants to take care of you. It's normal for children to help their older parents with these things." Older. That word had bothered me at the time, but I let it go. Now I understood that it was part of the strategy to make me feel old, incapable, dependent. I also recalled the increasingly spaced-out visits. Before marrying Sasha, Malcolm used to come see me at least 3 times a week. We'd have coffee together, talk for hours, and he'd tell me about his work, his plans, his dreams. After the wedding, the visits dropped to once a week, then once every 2 weeks, and in the last few months, I barely saw him once a month. Whenever I asked him why he didn't come more often, he had perfectly crafted excuses. "Work is too heavy, Mama. Sasha and I are really busy with a new project. You know how it is. Married life has its own demands." The pieces began to fit together with painful clarity. The constant questions about my health, which previously seemed like concern, I now saw for what they really were. Attempts to assess how much time I had left before they could execute their plan without raising suspicion. Sasha's suggestions that I should make a clear and detailed will to avoid legal problems in the future, I now understood as attempts to find out exactly how much money I had and where it was kept. Every conversation, every visit, every seemingly affectionate gesture had been calculated, measured, and designed to get them closer to my money. I stopped at a small park near downtown and turned off the engine. I needed to think clearly, to push away the emotions that clouded my judgment. I took out my phone and stared at the screen for several minutes before making a decision. I had to call someone. I needed help, but I had to choose wisely. I couldn't risk Malcolm finding out that I knew the truth before I was prepared to confront him. I dialed Tasha's number without hesitating any longer. Tasha had been my best friend for over 40 years. We met when our kids were in elementary school, and since then, we had shared everything: joys, sorrows, triumphs, and defeats. If there was anyone I could trust blindly in this moment of crisis, it was her. The phone rang 3 times before she answered with her cheerful, warm voice, which always comforted me. "Alara, what a pleasant surprise. I was just thinking of calling you to invite you for coffee tomorrow." But her tone immediately changed when she heard my shaky voice. "What happened? Are you okay? Where are you?" I couldn't hold back the tears again as I told her everything I had heard. Every word came out brokenly, mixed with sobs I couldn't control. Tasha listened in complete silence, without interrupting me once, and when I finished speaking, the only thing I could hear on the other end of the line was her heavy breathing. "That bastard," she finally said with a voice full of rage I had never heard from her. "That goddamn scumbag. Alara, listen to me closely. You are not going to let them get away with this. I'm coming over right now. Tell me exactly where you are." I gave her the park's location, and she said she'd be there in 15 minutes. While I waited, I tried to calm down, breathe deeply, and organize my thoughts into something coherent. Tasha arrived in record time. I saw her step out of her car with that determination that had always characterized her, and I felt immense relief, knowing I wasn't alone in this. She got into my car and, without a word, hugged me tightly. That embrace was like a balm for my shattered soul. I cried on her shoulder for several minutes while she stroked my hair and repeated over and over, "It's okay, friend. We're going to fix this. You won't be left with nothing. I promise you." When I finally calmed down enough to speak clearly, Tasha took my face in her hands and looked me directly in the eyes. "Now listen to me very carefully. I know you're devastated. I know you feel like your world has ended, but we cannot be driven by emotion. We have to be smart, strategic. Malcolm and that viper Sasha think they have you in their hands, but we are going to show them they were completely wrong." She was right. Tears and pain weren't going to return my money, nor were they going to make Malcolm face the consequences of his actions. I needed a plan. I needed to act with a cool head and a protected heart. "The first thing you have to do," Tasha continued with that practical tone I admired so much in her, "is go to the bank first thing tomorrow morning. You need to talk to someone you trust, someone who can help you understand exactly what movements were made in your account and if there's any way to reverse them or block the money. Do you know anyone at the bank who can help you?" I thought for a moment and remembered Mr. Davis, the manager of the branch where I had kept my accounts for over 20 years. He had always been kind and professional with me, and most importantly, he knew my financial history perfectly. "Mr. Davis," I finally said, "the manager of the main branch. He's known me for years. He knows I've always been careful with my money. If I explain the situation, I'm sure he'll help me." Tasha nodded in approval. "Perfect. Tomorrow morning, first thing, you go to the bank and talk to him. In the meantime, tonight you have to act like you know nothing. If Malcolm comes to your house, as he said he would, you have to pretend absolute normalcy. You cannot let him suspect that you discovered his plan, because that would give them time to move the money elsewhere or prepare an alibi. Do you think you can do that?" The question made me hesitate for a moment. Could I really look my son in the face and pretend I didn't know he had betrayed me in the most despicable way possible? Could I smile and converse normally when all I wanted was to scream at him, to ask him how he could have done this to me? But then I thought of Leroy. I thought of all the years we worked together, all the sacrifices we made to build a secure future. I thought of the nights I spent awake caring for Malcolm when he was sick as a child, the times I went without things so he could have the best. I thought of all the unconditional love I had given him throughout his life, and that thought, instead of weakening me, filled me with a strength I didn't know I possessed. "Yes," I told Tasha with a voice much firmer than I felt inside. "I can do it. I am going to do it. That money represents a lifetime of work and sacrifice. I won't allow them to take it without a fight." Tasha smiled proudly and squeezed my hand hard. "That's the Alara I know. The strong woman who built a business from scratch, who raised a son alone after being widowed, who always faces problems head on. Now I'm going to tell you something else, and I want you to engrave it in your mind. Malcolm stopped being your son the moment he decided to steal from you. You don't owe loyalty to someone who betrayed you this way. What you are going to do is not revenge. It is justice. It is taking back what rightfully belongs to you." Her words resonated within me like a hammer hitting an anvil. She was right. The Malcolm I loved, the son I had raised with so much affection, would never have been capable of doing something like this. The Malcolm who had planned to rob me was a stranger, and I had to treat him as such. We spent the next hour working out a detailed plan. Tasha had that wonderful ability to think of every detail, every possible scenario. "When you get home," she instructed me, "act like nothing happened. If Malcolm arrives and asks how you are, tell him you're fine, that you spent the day relaxing. Don't mention that you went looking for him. Tomorrow morning, as soon as the bank opens, you go and talk to Mr. Davis. You explain the whole situation to him. Tell him your son made transfers without your authorization using the power of attorney you gave him. That's misappropriation of funds. It's a crime. The bank has to help you track the money and, if possible, block it or reverse the transfers." "What if it's too late?" I asked with a lump in my throat. "What if they already moved the money somewhere we can't recover it?" Tasha shook her head. "I don't think so. Malcolm said he had just made the transfer, right? Banks have protocols for these kinds of situations, especially when it involves seniors who are victims of financial abuse." "Yes, Alara, that is exactly what your son did to you. Elder financial abuse. It is a serious crime, and the bank is obligated to help you. The idea that my own son could go to jail made my stomach turn, but at the same time, I felt a strange satisfaction thinking that he would finally face the consequences of his actions. You also need to document everything, Tasha continued, pulling a small notebook from her purse. Write down exactly what you heard today, with as much detail as possible, the date, the time, the exact words they said. That will be important if this goes to court. And one more thing. From now on, record all your conversations with Malcolm and Sasha. Use your phone. Leave it recording in your purse or your pocket. You need solid proof of what they did. The idea of recording my own son seemed surreal, like something out of a spy movie, but I understood it was necessary. If I wanted justice, if I wanted to recover what belonged to me, I needed irrefutable proof. We stayed in the park until it started to get dark, refining every detail of the plan. Tasha insisted that I had to remain calm at all times, that I couldn't let Malcolm see any sign that I knew the truth. "You're an actress for one night," she told me with a sad smile. "The best performance of your life. Make him believe he's still in control, that his plan worked perfectly. Meanwhile, we'll be working in silence to turn everything around." Finally, when the sky was completely dark, I felt ready to go home. Tasha followed me in her car to make sure I arrived safely, and before we said goodbye, she made me promise to call her as soon as I finished speaking with Mr. Davis the next day. I walked into my house that evening with my heart pounding so hard I feared he could hear it from the living room. The lights were on, and I recognized Malcolm's car parked in front of the entrance. I took 3 deep breaths, as Tasha had taught me, and pushed the door open with a calm I didn't feel at all. Malcolm was sitting in the living room looking at his phone with an expression of absolute tranquility that made my stomach churn. When he saw me enter, he looked up and gave me that smile that had so often lit up my days and now only provoked nausea. "Hey, Mama, where were you? I called you a few times, but you didn't answer." I had to use every ounce of self-control I possessed not to lunge at him and demand an explanation. Instead, I smiled as naturally as possible and set my purse on the dining table. I went to visit Tasha. You know how she is. Once she starts talking, time flies, and we didn't even notice the hours passing. The lie slipped from my lips with a facility that surprised even me. Malcolm nodded without showing the slightest suspicion. "Oh, that's good. I'm glad you spend time with your friends. Mama, it's important for you to have a social life." His words sounded sweet, concerned, exactly like the loving son I believed I had until just a few hours ago. I wondered how many times in the last few months he had used that same fake tone with me without me realizing it. I sat down in my favorite armchair, the one where I spent evenings reading or watching the news, and tried to act as normal as possible. "And what are you doing here at this hour? Shouldn't you be home with Sasha?" Malcolm shrugged nonchalantly. "She went out with some friends and I thought I'd come visit you. We haven't spent time together in days." How ironic, I thought bitterly. He had barely visited me for months, and today, the day he stole all my money, he decided it was a good time for a family visit. Of course, I now perfectly understood his true intentions. He wanted to be here when I discovered my account was empty. He wanted to see my reaction, fake surprise and concern, and play the role of the devoted son who would do everything possible to help his poor victimized mother. "That's sweet of you, son," I managed to say, even though the words burned in my throat. "Do you want me to cook dinner? I have chicken in the refrigerator. I can make that stew you loved so much when you were a kid." I saw a flash of something in his eyes, perhaps discomfort or maybe guilt, but it disappeared so fast that I thought I had imagined it. "Don't bother, Mama. I already ate something before I came, but we can have some coffee if you like." I got up and walked toward the kitchen, grateful to have a few minutes alone to compose myself. My hands trembled as I prepared the coffee, and I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming in frustration and pain. While waiting for the coffee to be ready, my mind traveled to the past once more. I remembered the day Malcolm was born, how Leroy and I cried with joy holding him for the first time. I remembered his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. I remembered how I consoled him when he had his first heartbreak at 16, how I supported him when he decided to study business administration instead of medicine, as his father had wanted. I remembered every birthday, every Christmas, every important moment of his life where I was present, loving him unconditionally, sacrificing for him without expecting anything in return. At what point did all that love turn into something he could betray so easily? At what point did I stop being his mother and become simply a source of money he could exploit without the slightest remorse? The question tormented me, but I had no answer. Or perhaps the answer was too painful to accept, that my son had always been capable of this, that I had simply refused to see the signs because a mother's love can be blind when it comes to seeing her children's flaws. I thought of all the times Leroy had been stricter with Malcolm, and I had defended him. He's just a boy, I would say. He'll mature. He'll learn. How many opportunities had I given him to learn to be a better person, and he had simply chosen this path? I returned to the living room with 2 steaming cups of coffee and sat across from Malcolm. He was still looking at his phone, probably texting Sasha to tell her everything was going according to plan. "Everything okay at work?" I asked, trying to maintain a normal conversation. Malcolm looked up and nodded. "Yes, Mama, everything's perfect. In fact, things are going so well that Sasha and I are thinking of buying a bigger house. You know, thinking about the future, maybe having kids." The mention of a bigger house confirmed exactly what they were going to use my money for. They had probably already been looking at properties, planning how to spend what they stole from me. "That's great, son," I managed to say, though I felt like I was choking. "It's always good to plan for the future. Your father and I were always very careful with our money. That's how we were able to build a stable life." I watched Malcolm look away, unable to hold my gaze. Well, I thought bitterly, at least he still had some shame left. "Speaking of money, Mama," Malcolm said after an awkward silence, "how are your finances? Everything okay with the bank accounts? You haven't had any problems?" There it was, the question I had been waiting for since he arrived. He wanted to know if I had already discovered the theft. He wanted to prepare to act accordingly. I took a sip of coffee to give myself time to think about my answer. I had to be convincing. I had to make him believe I knew nothing. "No, son. Everything is perfect. You know I check my accounts once a month when the bank statement arrives. I don't like logging into the online system all the time. All that technology makes me nervous." The lie worked perfectly. Malcolm visibly relaxed, his shoulders lowered, and that fake smile returned to his face. "You're right, Mama. At your age, it's better not to get complicated with so much technology. But if you ever need help with anything at the bank, you know you can count on me." At your age. Those words hurt me more than he probably intended. He was infantilizing me, making me feel incapable, all part of his strategy to justify what he had done to me. We spent the next hour talking about trivialities. Malcolm told me about his work, his plans with Sasha, and places they wanted to visit. I nodded and smiled at the appropriate moments, but my mind was somewhere else entirely. I was thinking about how I was going to confront him, how I was going to recover my money, and how I was going to make him pay for what he had done to me. When he finally got up to leave, he hugged me and kissed me on the forehead, as he had done 1,000 times before. "I love you very much, Mama. Take care." Those words, which would have filled me with warmth before, now only gave me a shiver. I closed the door behind him and collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally exhausted. I had managed to act normally. I had succeeded in making him suspect nothing, but the effort had left me completely empty. I took out my phone and sent a message to Tasha. I did it, acted normal, going to the bank tomorrow. Her reply arrived immediately. "I'm proud of you. Tomorrow, your recovery begins. Get some rest tonight. You're going to need it." I tried to follow her advice, but sleep didn't come easily. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, remembering every moment of Malcolm's life, looking for signs I should have seen earlier. I remembered when he was 12 and I caught him stealing money from my purse. At the time, I excused it as childish curiosity, as a mistake any child could make. Leroy wanted to punish him harshly, but I intervened. "He's just a child," I said. "He'll learn it's wrong." Now I wondered if that had been the first clue of what was to come, if my indulgence in that moment had planted the seed of what was now a complete betrayal. I also remembered when he was 20 and we helped him pay off his credit card debts. He had spent recklessly, living beyond his means, and when he couldn't pay, we covered everything so he wouldn't ruin his credit history. At the time, I thought I was being a good mother, protecting him from the consequences of his youthful mistakes. Now I saw that all I had accomplished was teaching him that someone would always rescue him from his bad decisions. I woke up at 6 in the morning after barely 3 hours of restless sleep filled with nightmares. In my dreams, Malcolm was a small child again, and I tried to reach him, but he moved farther and farther away, laughing as I desperately shouted his name. I got up with a headache and an aching body, as if I had aged 10 years in a single night. I made myself a strong coffee and sat down to wait for the bank to open. I had decided to arrive at 9 o'clock sharp as soon as the doors opened to talk to Mr. Davis before the place filled up with customers and I could have his full attention. By 8:30, I was ready, dressed in my beige suit, which always made me feel more secure and professional. I looked in the mirror and almost didn't recognize the woman looking back. My eyes were swollen from the tears of the night before, and my face showed every one of my 70 years with brutal clarity. But there was something else in that look, something I hadn't seen in a long time, pure, hard determination. I put on a little makeup to cover the dark circles, carefully combed my hair, and left the house with my head held high. Tasha had sent me an early message. "I'll be thinking of you. Call me as soon as you leave the bank. You are strong, you are brave. You will get back what is yours." The drive to the bank seemed endless. Every red light was torture. Every minute that passed increased my anxiety. What if it was too late? What if Malcolm had already moved the money somewhere inaccessible? What if the bank refused to help me because I myself had given my son the power of attorney to manage my account? The questions tormented me, but I tried to remain calm. I remembered Tasha's words. I needed to be serene, articulate, and convincing. I couldn't show up as a confused and emotional elderly woman. I had to present myself as what I was, an intelligent and capable woman who had been the victim of a crime and demanded justice. I arrived at the bank at exactly 9 o'clock. The security guard, a man named Orlando who had known me for years, greeted me with his usual kindness. "Good morning, Ms. Jenkins. You're early today." I returned the greeting with a smile that I hoped looked natural and headed directly to Mr. Davis's desk. He was reviewing documents on his computer, but looked up when I approached and received me with a professional smile. "Ms. Jenkins, good to see you. How can I help you today?" I sat down in front of him and took a deep breath. It was now or never. "Mr. Davis, I need to talk to you about something very serious that happened with my account," I began in a firm voice despite the trembling I felt inside. "My son made transfers from my account without my authorization, and I need to know exactly what happened and what I can do to recover my money." I watched Mr. Davis's expression change immediately from professional cordiality to genuine concern. "Without your authorization? But Ms. Jenkins, your son Malcolm has power of attorney over your main account. Any transaction he makes is legally valid because you granted him that right." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, even though I had expected them. "I know," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. "I gave him that power thinking it was for emergencies, so he could help me if I ever needed it. I never imagined he would use it to rob me." Mr. Davis was silent for a moment, processing what I was telling him. Then he typed something on his computer, and his brow furrowed as he looked at the screen. "I see here that 3 large transfers were indeed made from your account in the last 2 weeks. The most recent one was yesterday afternoon for an amount of $140,000. The previous 2 were 10 and 15 days ago for $80,000 and $60,000 respectively. All were sent to an account in the name of Sasha Williams." My daughter-in-law's full name coming from Mr. Davis's lips made everything feel even more real, more painful. $280,000. My entire liquid savings transferred to that woman's account, the woman who had gained my trust only to destroy me. I need you to help me block that account and recover my money, I told Mr. Davis with urgency in my voice. Malcolm robbed me. He used the power I gave him in good faith to strip me of everything I own. There has to be something you can do. Mr. Davis ran his hands over his face in a gesture of worry. Ms. Jenkins, this is very delicate. Legally, your son had the right to make those transfers because you granted him power of attorney. However, if you allege a breach of trust and misappropriation, then we are talking about a crime. But for the bank to act, we need you to file a formal complaint with the authorities. The word complaint, denuncia, resonated in my head. Reporting my own son meant potentially sending him to jail, destroying his life, and marking him forever with a criminal record. But then I remembered his voice on the phone the day before, that cruel laugh as he said he could imagine my face upon discovering the empty account. I remembered how he had meticulously planned everything with Sasha, how he had used my love and trust against me. I remembered the 40 years Leroy and I worked to build that savings, the sleepless nights, the sacrifices, the deprivations. I will file the complaint, I said in a firm, clear voice. Malcolm stopped being my son when he decided to steal from me. I will do everything necessary to recover what is mine and to make him face the consequences of his actions. I saw a flash of admiration in Mr. Davis's eyes. He probably hadn't seen a case of elder financial abuse where the victim was so determined to fight. Mr. Davis began to patiently explain the process to me. Here is what we are going to do. First, I will immediately block your account so no further transfers can be made. Second, I will generate a complete report of all transactions made in the last 3 months so you have detailed documentation. Third, I will contact the bank's fraud department to inform them of the situation. They will initiate an internal investigation. And fourth, you will need to go today to file a formal complaint with the district attorney's office. With that complaint, the bank can attempt to block or trace the money that was transferred to your daughter-in-law's account. I nodded, making mental notes of each step. It was a complicated process, but at least there was a path forward, a possibility of justice. Is there any chance of recovering the money? I asked with a trembling voice. Mr. Davis sighed before answering. It depends on several factors. If the money is still in the destination account and we manage to block it before they move it, yes, there are good possibilities. But if they have already transferred it to another account or withdrawn it as cash, it will be much more complicated. Time is crucial here, Ms. Jenkins. The faster you act, the better chance you have of recovering your savings. His words filled me with a renewed urgency. I couldn't lose another minute. Can you do all that right now? Block the account, generate the reports, contact the fraud department? Mr. Davis nodded and immediately began working on his computer. While he typed and made phone calls, my mind wouldn't stop racing. I wondered what Malcolm and Sasha were doing right now. Had they already tried to move the money elsewhere? Were they celebrating their victory? Or maybe Malcolm was feeling some remorse for what he had done to me. I immediately discarded that last option. The Malcolm I had heard on the phone had no room for remorse. He was cold, calculating, capable of laughing at the pain he would cause his own mother. That wasn't the son I had raised, or maybe he had always been like that, and I had simply refused to see it. Done, Mr. Davis said, after almost 30 minutes of intense work. Your main account is blocked. No one can make transactions from it, not even you for the moment, until the legal situation is resolved. Here is the complete report of all transactions from the last 3 months. As you can see, the 3 large transfers I mentioned were the only unusual operations. Before that, your account showed a very stable and predictable pattern, exactly as you have managed it all these years. He handed me a folder with several printed documents, which I carefully placed in my purse. I also contacted the fraud department. They will call you in the next 24 hours to conduct a more detailed investigation. and here is the address and phone number for the District Attorney's Specialized Financial Crimes Unit. You need to go today to file your formal complaint." I stood up from the chair with my legs still trembling, but with a new determination in my heart. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. You don't know how much I appreciate your help in this difficult time." He stood up too and took my hands in a paternal gesture. "Ms. Jenkins, I've known you for many years. I know you are a responsible person who is careful with your money. What your son did to you is unforgivable. I sincerely hope you can recover what is yours and that he faces the consequences of his actions." His words comforted me more than he probably imagined. I left the bank with the folder of documents clutched to my chest, as if it were an invaluable treasure. As soon as I was outside, I called Tasha and told her everything that had happened. She listened attentively, and when I finished speaking, she said in a firm voice, "Perfect, Alara. Now you go straight to the DA's office to file that complaint. I'm going there too. I don't want you to face this alone. I'll meet you at the entrance in 30 minutes. Her unconditional support gave me renewed strength. I drove toward the DA's office with my heart pounding. Every traffic light, every turn brought me closer to the moment I would have to officially state that my son was a thief, that the person who had come out of my womb and to whom I had dedicated my entire life had betrayed me in the most despicable way. Tasha was already waiting for me when I arrived. She hugged me tightly, and we walked into the building together. The place was crowded with people, all with their own tragedies and problems. A young woman was crying in a corner while talking on the phone. An elderly man stared blankly into space with a lost expression. I wondered how many of those people had also been betrayed by their own loved ones. How many stories of pain and disappointment were hidden behind every face in that waiting room. We approached the information desk, and a woman with a tired expression attended to us. "I'm here to file a complaint for misappropriation and financial abuse," I said, in a voice I tried to keep steady. The woman handed us some forms and instructed us to wait to be called. We sat down on uncomfortable plastic chairs, and I began to fill out the papers with trembling hands. Every line I wrote felt like plunging a knife into my own heart. Complainant's name, Alara Jenkins, widow of Leroy. Defendant's name, Malcolm Jenkins, my son. Relationship to the defendant, mother. That last word made me pause. Mother. What cruel irony. Mothers are supposed to protect their children, not report them to the authorities. But then I remembered that children are also supposed to take care of their parents, especially in their old age, not rob them of everything they own. We waited nearly 2 hours before we were called. A young prosecutor named Chen received us in her office. She had a serious yet kind look that made me feel that maybe they would take me seriously. I handed her all the documents Mr. Davis had given me at the bank and began to tell her the whole story from the beginning. I told her how Malcolm had convinced me to make him the power of attorney on my account, how I had overheard his phone conversation with Sasha, and about the transfers totaling $280,000. Prosecutor Chen took notes constantly and asked me specific questions about dates, amounts, and details. "Ms. Jenkins," she said after listening to me for almost an hour, "what you describe is clearly a case of elder financial abuse and misappropriation. The fact that your son had power of attorney did not give him the right to use that power for his own benefit without your knowledge or consent. We are going to initiate a formal investigation, and I will immediately request a freeze on the account where the money was deposited." Her words filled me with hope. Finally, someone in a position of authority was taking my situation seriously. They were validating my pain and my indignation. "How long will all this take?" I asked anxiously. Prosecutor Chen sighed before answering. "Legal processes can be slow, I won't lie to you. But given that we have clear documentation and the crime is recent, we will act quickly. In the next 48 hours, we should be able to freeze the destination account and summon your son and daughter-in-law for questioning. We will also request an order to review all their recent financial movements." The idea of Malcolm and Sasha being summoned for questioning gave me mixed feelings. On one hand, I felt satisfaction that they would finally face the consequences of their actions. On the other hand, the pain of a mother who had failed to raise an honest son tore me apart inside. We left the DA's office 3 hours after entering. I was emotionally and physically exhausted, but I also felt a strange relief. I had taken the first step. I had formalized my complaint. I had set the machinery of justice in motion. Tasha insisted that we go eat something because I hadn't eaten a bite all day. We sat down at a quiet little restaurant, and she ordered for both of us because I didn't even have the energy to read the menu. "I am so proud of you," Tasha said, taking my hand across the table. "I know this is the hardest thing you've ever had to do in your life, but you are doing the right thing." "The right thing," I repeated, my voice cracking. "I just reported my own son to the authorities. What kind of mother does that?" Tasha squeezed my hand tighter. "A mother who respects herself. A mother who understands that love does not mean enabling abuse. A mother who knows that letting Malcolm get away with it not only hurts you, but turns him into a criminal who could do the same to other people in the future." Her words made sense, but the pain was still unbearable. I thought of all the mothers who had had to face the reality that their children were not who they believed them to be. How do you survive that betrayal? How do you rebuild a life after that kind of disappointment? While we ate in silence, my phone started ringing. It was Malcolm. My heart skipped a beat. Would he know what I had done? Would he have received some notification from the bank? I looked at Tasha for guidance, and she nodded. "Answer it, but don't tell him anything yet. Keep acting normal." I took a deep breath and answered the call, trying to make my voice sound as natural as possible. "Hello, son?" Malcolm's voice sounded tense, worried, completely different from the confidence he had the day before. "Mama, did you try to use your bank account today? Because I received a notification that the account is blocked. I called the bank, but they told me they couldn't give me any information and that you have to call." There it was, the moment I had been waiting for. Malcolm had discovered that his plan hadn't gone as perfectly as he thought. "Blocked?" I said, feigning surprise. "No, I haven't tried to use the account today. Why would it be blocked?" I heard Malcolm breathing heavily on the other end of the line. "I don't know, Mama. It must be a bank error. Do you want me to come over and we can go to the bank together to sort this out?" The irony of his offer would have made me laugh if I wasn't so angry. "Don't worry, son. I'll take care of going to the bank tomorrow to ask. It's probably just some system error." There was a long silence on the other end. "Are you sure, Mama? I can come right now if you want." "I'm sure. Thank you for worrying." I hung up, and my hands trembled so much that I almost dropped the phone. "Perfect," Tasha said with a satisfied smile. Now he knows something went wrong, but he doesn't know exactly what. That's going to make him nervous. He's going to make mistakes, and meanwhile, justice is already in motion. We finished eating, and Tasha insisted on accompanying me home. When we arrived, she made me promise to call her if Malcolm or Sasha showed up. "You are not alone in this," she reminded me before leaving. "You have all my help whenever you need it." That night, I sat in my empty living room in that house that suddenly felt too big and too quiet. I looked at the photographs decorating the walls. Malcolm as a baby, Malcolm at his graduation, Malcolm on his wedding day. All those images of a life that now seemed like a lie. When exactly did everything break? Was it gradual, or was there a specific moment when my son became this person capable of betraying me? I would probably never have those answers. 2 days of agonizing waiting passed before Prosecutor Chen called me again. Her voice sounded professional, but there was a tone of urgency that immediately put me on alert. "Ms. Jenkins, I need you to come to my office as soon as possible. We have discovered something important during our investigation." My heart began to pound as I quickly got ready to leave. I called Tasha, and she insisted on coming with me. On the way to the DA's office, my mind wouldn't stop imagining what Prosecutor Chen could have discovered. Had they found more accounts drained, more victims? Or had Malcolm managed to move the money, and there would be no way to recover it? When we arrived at Prosecutor Chen's office, we encountered an unexpected surprise. A man was sitting in one of the waiting chairs, a gentleman of approximately 75 years old, looking defeated and tired. Prosecutor Chen led us into her office along with him and formally introduced us. "Ms. Jenkins, I'd like you to meet Mr. Sterling. Mr. Sterling, this is Alara Jenkins. I believe you both have something very important in common." The man looked at me with eyes full of sadness and shame before extending his hand to greet me. There was something in his gaze that I recognized immediately, because it was the same pain I saw in the mirror every morning. The mark of betrayal. Prosecutor Chen sat behind her desk and began to explain in a serious voice. During our investigation into Sasha, we discovered that she was married before, 4 years ago. Her husband at that time was Mr. Sterling's son, Dominic. The pattern was exactly the same as with you, Ms. Jenkins. Sasha convinced Dominic that his father was too old to handle his own finances. She manipulated him until he obtained power of attorney over his father's accounts, and then, little by little, they began to transfer money. When Mr. Sterling realized what was happening, they had already taken over $10,000. His son and Sasha disappeared. They divorced shortly after, and Mr. Sterling never filed a formal complaint. I felt the room spinning around me. I looked at Mr. Sterling with a mix of horror and compassion. "Why didn't you report it?" I managed to ask with a trembling voice. The man lowered his gaze, ashamed. "Because he was my son, ma'am. I thought if I reported him, his life would be ruined forever. I thought maybe with time he would mature, that he would regret it and return the money. But it never happened. He left the state with the money, and I never heard from him again. When I found out that Sasha had remarried and what she had done to you, I knew I had to speak up. I can't allow her to keep destroying families, keep manipulating sons against their parents." Tears rolled down his wrinkled cheeks, and I felt an immediate connection with this man who had lived my same hell. "This completely changes the nature of the case," Prosecutor Chen continued in a serious tone. "We are no longer talking about an isolated incident. Sasha has an established pattern of manipulation and fraud. This is pure premeditation. She specifically seeks out men who have elderly parents with assets, marries them, manipulates them into robbing their own parents, and then disappears with the money. She is a professional scammer, and your son, Malcolm, Ms. Jenkins, is her accomplice, although he is probably also a victim of her manipulation to some extent." Those words gave me a small hope that perhaps Malcolm wasn't entirely a monster. Maybe he had been manipulated by a woman more calculating and experienced than he was. But then I remembered the conversation I had heard, the way Malcolm laughed at the thought of my face when I discovered the empty account. No, he wasn't just a victim. He had actively participated. He had enjoyed planning my ruin. "What does this mean for my case?" I asked Prosecutor Chen urgently. "It means we have a much stronger case," she replied with satisfaction in her voice. "With Mr. Sterling's testimony and the documentation of that previous case, we can demonstrate a pattern of criminal behavior. We have already obtained a court order to completely freeze the account where your money is deposited. Sasha tried to transfer the funds 2 days ago, but the transaction was rejected. Now she is desperate, trying to understand what happened." "And Malcolm?" I asked, although I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Malcolm was summoned for questioning yesterday, but he didn't show up. He sent a lawyer in his place, claiming he was sick. His lawyer claims it was all a misunderstanding, that as power of attorney, he had the right to manage your money, and that you had given him verbal permission to make the transfers. Of course, we don't believe him, especially now that we have Mr. Sterling's testimony demonstrating Sasha's modus operandi." I turned to Mr. Sterling with curiosity. "Did your son also allege that you had given him permission?" The man nodded sadly. "He said I was senile, that I didn't remember giving him authorization. He used my age against me, and I felt so ashamed, so humiliated, that I preferred to just let it go and not fight. It was the worst decision of my life." I took Mr. Sterling's wrinkled hand in mine. "This time, it's going to be different. This time, we are going to fight together, and we are going to make sure Sasha pays for what she did to both of us." I saw his eyes fill with tears again, but this time There was something more than sadness in them. There was hope. There was gratitude. Thank you, Ms. Jenkins. Thank you for having the courage I didn't have. If my testimony can help you recover your money and send Sasha to jail, I will give it gladly. Tasha, who had been silent the whole time, wiped the tears rolling down her cheeks. It was a heartbreaking but powerful scene. Two seniors uniting against the injustice they had suffered. Prosecutor Chen explained the next steps. We are going to summon Sasha for questioning tomorrow morning. She can no longer refuse because we have enough evidence to arrest her if she doesn't cooperate. We will also issue a preventive arrest warrant for Malcolm if he does not present himself voluntarily in the next 24 hours. With Mr. Sterling's testimony, we have enough to demonstrate that Sasha is a serial scammer and that Malcolm is her accomplice. The money belonging to both of you will be recovered and returned. Her words filled me with a satisfaction I had never felt before. It wasn't revenge I was seeking. It was pure and simple justice. We left the DA's office with Mr. Sterling and invited him out for coffee. We needed to talk, share our stories, and heal together in some way. We sat in a quiet cafe, and Mr. Sterling began to tell us his complete story. My son was named Dominic. He was a good boy until he met Sasha. She was like a poison that slowly entered his mind. At first I found her pleasant, polite, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. She was always calculating, evaluating. When they started asking me for money for supposed emergencies, I gave it to them without hesitation because I trusted my son. I never imagined they were systematically robbing me. How did you discover the truth? I asked him. Mr. Sterling sighed deeply before answering. One day I went to the bank to withdraw money to pay for surgery I urgently needed. The teller looked at me confused and told me my account was practically empty. I thought it was a mistake, that someone had hacked my account, but when they reviewed the transactions, they all had Dominic's authorization as my power of attorney. I confronted my son that same night, and he denied everything. He said I was confused, that I had probably made those withdrawals myself and didn't remember them. Sasha was there and looked at me with that false smile while my son called me senile and told me I needed psychiatric help. "And what did you do?" Tasha asked softly. "Nothing. I felt so humiliated, so ashamed, that I just kept quiet. I let them go with my money because I couldn't bear the thought of everyone knowing that my own son had robbed me. It was the worst decision of my life. I not only lost my money, I lost my dignity. I have lived these 4 years on a miserable pension, barely surviving, while my son and that woman were probably spending my money on luxuries." His story was heartbreaking and made me even more determined not to make the same mistake. The next day, I received a call early in the morning. It was Prosecutor Chen, and her voice sounded triumphant. "Ms. Jenkins, I have excellent news. Sasha was arrested this morning when she tried to leave the country. They found her at the airport with suitcases full of cash and jewelry that she apparently bought with the stolen money. Malcolm was with her. Both are in custody and will be formally charged this afternoon. The cash they were carrying was confiscated as evidence, and we are tracing all the purchases they made in recent weeks to recover as much as possible." My legs nearly gave out when I heard the news. Finally, after days of anguish and pain, justice was beginning to become a reality. Tasha arrived at my house minutes after I hung up the phone with Prosecutor Chen. She had developed an almost psychic ability to know when I needed her. I told her everything, my voice broken with emotion. We both cried, but this time they were not tears of pain, but of relief and justice. "I knew you could do it," Tasha told me, hugging me tightly. "I knew your strength would win in the end. Now Malcolm and that viper will face the consequences of their actions." We spent the morning talking, having coffee, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few weeks. It felt almost surreal to think that just 1 week ago, my life was normal, or what I thought was normal. Prosecutor Chen called me again at noon to ask me to come to the DA's office that afternoon for the arraignment hearing. "It is important that you be present," she told me. "Malcolm has requested to speak with you before the hearing. Of course, you are not obligated to see him if you don't want to, but I thought you should know." My first instinct was to absolutely refuse. What could Malcolm say to me that would justify what he had done? What words could repair the betrayal, the pain, the humiliation? But then I thought that maybe I needed that closure. I needed to look him in the eyes one last time and tell him everything I felt. "I accept seeing him," I told Prosecutor Chen in a firm voice. "But I want Tasha to be present with me. I will not face him alone." Prosecutor Chen agreed and scheduled the meeting for 3 o'clock in the afternoon. The hours until that moment passed with torturous slowness. I changed clothes 3 times without being able to decide what to wear. What do you wear to confront the son who betrayed you? Finally, I settled on a dark gray dress that made me feel serious and respectable. I looked in the mirror and rehearsed what I would say to him. I had rehearsed 1,000 conversations in my mind during these days, but now that the moment was near, all the words seemed insufficient. Tasha and I arrived at the DA's office at exactly 3. Prosecutor Chen received us and took us to a small interrogation room. "Malcolm is in the room next door," she explained. "You have 30 minutes. I will be outside in case you need anything. Remember, Ms. Jenkins, everything said here can be used as evidence in the process, so be careful with your words." I nodded, although I wasn't sure I could control my emotions when I saw Malcolm. The door opened, and there he was, my son, handcuffed and looking completely different from the man I knew. His face was haggard, he had deep dark circles under his eyes, and his clothes were wrinkled. But what impacted me most was his gaze. There was no arrogance or confidence left, only fear and what seemed to be genuine regret. "Mama," Malcolm said, his voice breaking as soon as he saw me. He tried to approach, but the handcuffs prevented him. I stood near the door with Tasha at my side, holding my arm. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. Seeing him like that, reduced and defeated, brought about such contradictory feelings that I didn't know if I wanted to hug him or slap him. "Mama, please," Malcolm continued, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I need you to listen to me. I need to explain what happened." I finally found my voice, and when I spoke, it sounded cold and distant, even to my own ears. "Explain it, then. Explain how my own son, whom I loved and cared for all his life, could steal everything I owned. Explain how you could laugh imagining my face when I discovered the empty account." Malcolm lowered his gaze, unable to meet my eyes. "I didn't want to, Mama. You have to believe me. Sasha manipulated me. She convinced me that you had more money than you needed, that you deserved to live more modestly in your old age. She made me believe we were taking what would eventually be my inheritance anyway." His words filled me with such intense rage that I felt I could explode. "Your inheritance?" I repeated, my voice trembling with anger. "That's how you justify robbing your own mother, thinking that it was money that would belong to you someday anyway. Malcolm, that money represented my security, my peace of mind, my dignified old age. Your father and I worked 40 years to build that savings, and you took it as if it were yours by right, as if I had no right to enjoy it or decide what to do with it." "I know, Mama, I know, and I deeply regret it," Malcolm sobbed. "Sasha poisoned my mind. She showed me a lifestyle I desperately wanted and convinced me that the only way to get it was by taking your money. But I swear I never wanted to hurt you. I thought somehow everything would be okay, that you would never know, or that I would find a way to pay you back eventually." His excuses sounded hollow and pathetic. "You never wanted to hurt me?" I said incredulously. "Malcolm, I heard you on the phone laughing at me, imagining my suffering. That wasn't Sasha talking. That was you. Your voice, your words, your cruel laugh. You can't blame her for everything when you participated actively and enthusiastically." Malcolm slumped into the chair and buried his face in his handcuffed hands. "You're right. I can't just blame Sasha. I made the decisions. I made the transfers. I betrayed you, and now I'm going to pay for it. Probably with years in prison. My life is ruined, my reputation destroyed, my career finished. But the worst part is that I lost the most important person in my life. I lost my mother, and that hurts me more than any punishment they can give me." His words would have softened my heart at another point in my life, but that moment had passed. The woman who had been his unconditional mother had died the day I overheard that phone conversation. "You are going to prison, Malcolm," I told him in a firm, cold voice. "You are going to pay for what you did to me, and when you get out, if you ever do get out, don't expect to find the mother you knew. That woman no longer exists. You killed her with your betrayal." Malcolm looked up, and I saw a pain so profound in his eyes that for a moment I felt something akin to compassion, but I immediately crushed it. "Mama, please," he pleaded. "I'm not asking you to forgive me now. I know I don't deserve it. I just ask that someday, when I have paid my debt to society and to you, you give me the chance to prove to you that I can change, that I can be the son I should have always been." I looked at this man who had been my baby, my child, my teenager, my adult son, and felt as if I were looking at a stranger. "I can't promise you anything, Malcolm. Right now, I only feel pain and disappointment. Perhaps someday, many years from now, I can find some peace regarding all this. But forgiveness? I don't know if I can ever give you that." I turned to leave, but Malcolm shouted my name. "Mama, the money is almost all there in the account they blocked. We only spent about $20,000 on those jewels they confiscated. The rest is there. Prosecutor Chen says they will return it all to you. At least that. At least I didn't leave you with nothing." His words didn't console me. The money was important, yes, but what he had taken from me went far beyond dollars and cents. I walked out of that room with Tasha supporting me because my legs could barely carry me. In the hallway, I collapsed into a chair and cried as I hadn't in weeks. I cried for the son I had lost, for the relationship that would never be the same, for the years of unconditional love that had been betrayed. Tasha hugged me and let me cry on her shoulder without saying a word. Sometimes words are unnecessary when the pain is so deep. Prosecutor Chen approached after a few minutes and waited patiently for me to calm down. "The arraignment hearing is in 1 hour, she told me softly. "Do you feel strong enough to attend? Or would you prefer the prosecutor to represent you without your presence?" I took a deep breath and wiped away my tears. "I'm going to be there," I said with renewed determination. "I need to see this through to the end." The hearing was exactly as difficult as I had imagined. Seeing Malcolm and Sasha stand before the judge, hearing the formal charges of misappropriation, fraud, and elder financial abuse, was like living a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. Sasha maintained a tough, defiant expression throughout the hearing, showing no trace of remorse. It was as if she had finally dropped the mask, and now I could see her true face, that of a cold, calculating predator. Malcolm, in contrast, kept his head down throughout the process, unable to meet my eyes. The judge heard all the testimonies, reviewed the evidence, and finally dictated his decision. Both would remain in preventive custody until the formal trial, which would take place in 3 months. Bail was set at an amount so high that I knew neither of them could pay it. Mr. Sterling was also present at the hearing, and his testimony was devastating. He spoke in a trembling but firm voice about how his son Dominic and Sasha had left him ruined, about the years of shame and humiliation he had lived in silence. When he finished speaking, the judge looked at him with compassion and assured him that this time justice would not fail. "Mr. Sterling, I deeply regret that you had to live 4 years with this injustice. Although it is too late to prosecute your son, who is apparently out of the country, I will ensure that Ms. Williams pays for all her crimes, including the one committed against you." The judge's words gave Mr. Sterling something he hadn't had in years: validation and hope. Prosecutor Chen was brilliant in presenting the case. She showed Sasha's pattern of behavior, the similarities between my case and Mr. Sterling's, and the evident premeditation in every step of the plan. She also presented evidence that Sasha had been investigating other seniors in the city, possibly looking for her next victim. There were lists of names on her computer, addresses, and financial information that she could only have obtained illegally. It was a criminal operation much larger than anyone had initially imagined. The judge ordered a complete investigation to identify if there were more victims who had not reported. 3 months later, the day of the final trial arrived. In that time, my life had changed in ways I never imagined. Prosecutor Chen had managed to recover almost all my money. The $60,000 that had not been spent were returned to my account, and the jewels they had bought with the remaining $20,000 were sold to recover part of that amount. In the end, I only lost about $5,000, an insignificant amount compared to what could have been. But the money was the least of it. What I had truly lost was priceless. The trust in my son, the innocence of believing that family love was unbreakable, the peace of mind of feeling secure in my own old age. The trial was quick because the evidence was overwhelming. Sasha was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud, misappropriation, and being part of a criminal organization dedicated to the financial abuse of seniors. During the investigation, they had found connections to other similar cases in different states. Malcolm received a reduced sentence of 5 years, partially because he had cooperated with the investigation and had shown genuine remorse. Also because the judge considered that he had been partially manipulated by Sasha, although he made it clear that this did not absolve him of his responsibility. "Mr. Jenkins," the judge told him in a severe tone, "you betrayed the person who loved you most in this world. You betrayed your mother, the woman who gave you life and dedicated her entire existence to caring for you. That is a crime that goes beyond the legal. It is a moral crime that will haunt you for the rest of your life." When the judge dictated the sentences, I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. Justice had been done, yes, but at what cost? My son would go to prison. The family I once had was destroyed forever, but I also knew I had done the right thing. By reporting Malcolm and Sasha, I had not only protected my own savings, I had prevented them from continuing to destroy other families. I had given a voice to victims like Mr. Sterling, who had suffered in silence. I had shown that seniors are not easy targets, that we have dignity and the right to defend ourselves. After the trial, Mr. Sterling approached me with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Alara. Thank you for having the courage I didn't have. Because of your bravery, I can finally sleep in peace, knowing that woman can't keep hurting people." I hugged him tightly, feeling a deep connection with this man who had shared my pain. "Thank you too, Mr. Sterling. Your testimony was crucial. Without you, Sasha might have remained free, destroying more lives." We exchanged phone numbers and promised to stay in touch. We had formed a friendship born of shared suffering, but also shared victory. The following months were a period of slow but steady healing. Tasha was by my side every step of the way, helping me rebuild my life. I decided to sell the house where I had lived for so many years because every corner reminded me of Malcolm, of the happy moments that were now stained by betrayal. I bought a smaller condo in a building with other residents my age. It was a new beginning, a blank page where I could write a different story for my golden years. I also decided to do something meaningful with my experience. Along with Mr. Sterling and with Prosecutor Chen's support, we created a support group for seniors who had been victims of financial abuse by relatives. We met once a week at a community center and shared our stories, our pain, but also our victories. I discovered there were many more victims than I imagined, people who had been robbed by sons, grandchildren, and nephews, and who carried the shame in silence. Our group gave them a safe space to speak, to heal, and to regain their dignity. 6 months after the trial, I received a letter from Malcolm from prison. I held it in my hands for days without opening it, unsure if I wanted to read what he had to say. Finally, one quiet afternoon, while having coffee on my new balcony, I gathered the courage to open it. The letter was full of apologies, remorse, and pleas for forgiveness. Malcolm told me he had started therapy in prison, that he was trying to understand how he had reached that point, how he had allowed greed and manipulation to destroy the most valuable thing he had. He told me he didn't expect me to forgive him, that he understood if I never wanted to see him again, but that he needed me to know that he spent every day of his sentence thinking about the harm he had caused me. I read the letter 3 times before putting it in a drawer. I wasn't ready to answer. Maybe I never would be. Forgiveness is not something that can be forced or rushed. It's a personal process that each person undertakes at their own pace if they ever do. For now, I focused on healing, rebuilding my life, and finding purpose and meaning in my days. I had discovered that I was stronger than I thought, more capable than I imagined. I had faced the worst possible betrayal and had survived. More than surviving, I had prospered in a different way. One afternoon, almost 1 year after all the drama, I was sitting in a cafe with Tasha and Mr. Sterling. We had become an inseparable trio, united by our experiences, but also by genuine mutual affection. Mr. Sterling looked at me with that warm smile I had learned to appreciate and said, "Alara, you know what the most ironic thing about all this is? Malcolm and Sasha thought that by robbing you, they would take away your strength, your security, and your future. But all they managed to do was show you how incredibly strong you are. They took your money, yes, but you recovered much more than that. You recovered your dignity, your voice, your power." His words struck me deeply because he was right. I had lost my son, at least for now, but I had found myself. That night, back in my condo, I sat in my favorite armchair with a cup of hot tea and looked out the window at the illuminated city. I thought about everything that had happened, everything I had lost, but also everything I had gained. I had learned that unconditional love does not mean enabling abuse. I had learned that standing up for what is right sometimes requires incredibly painful decisions. I had learned that family is not always who shares your blood, but who stands by your side in the darkest moments. And above all, I had learned that it is never too late to be brave, to defend your dignity, and to start anew. I smiled as I took a sip of tea and thought of the words I had once said, words that had become my mantra. Today I am alone, but for the first time in years, I am at peace. And that is priceless. Life had taught me that sometimes the price of peace is very high, but it is always, always worth paying. Means you keep going even when you are. I used to think love meant forgiving everything, but now I know real love sometimes means protecting yourself. Maybe you can't always stop people from hurting you, but you can choose not to stay broken. If you've ever been betrayed or let down, remember this. It's never too late to start over, no matter how old you are. Today, I'm alone, but I'm free, and that peace is something no one can take away. If you feel the same way and liked my story, hit that like button so we can see how many of us there are. I'm curious. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? Drop it in the comments. And if you'd like to support my journey, you can send a small donation. Thank you for listening and sharing your time with me. For more life stories like this one, check out my other videos and subscribe to the channel. On your screen, you'll see 2 new stories I'm sure you'll love. Click one and start listening right away. Love to you all.